not an expert, so I'll show you some cool things I've learned from Dart. So Dart works on the client and the server, and people say, "Oh, you need to learn one language for both things." And people often use that same. How do you make the closure and closure script? They say, "Oh, look, it's so easy. Do the same thing in 2 different places, and you can share some of the same code, at least in closure." So it runs on the server, and you can run it in your browser. So there's a blog by Seth Ladd, who's a outspoken person about Dart. I think he works at Google. Right?
He's their developer advocate.
Yeah, he's the guy that talks about it. So he's got some videos online, like 10, and he's done some conference talks. So he has a screenshot of Dart runs here and Dart runs there that I stole. And of course, the ladies from Blues Brothers. So who uses Dart? Dart's used by Google, of course, because they wrote it. They use it for the Google Fiber, and Google Apps uses it, and the election uses it. I'm not sure what the election is, but that was on the list of places that use Dart. Netflix uses it for their security monkey, and to integrate with AWS. And there's a couple other places that use it on the Dart one-page soundtrack to record music with their browser, and Watson is a project management tool. SonarDesign, where Jesse works, uses it, and so far that's the only place I know of in Austin that uses Dart. Maybe you all seen Dart used somewhere in Austin? No? Pretty cool. All right. So Dart. It runs in the browser called Chromium. It's a special browser by Google that runs it in the Dart virtual machine. And Jesse's going to talk about that a little bit later. But you can compile it to JavaScript, so you can use it now before the browsers support it, or until people who use Chromium. And actually, the code is not bad when it compiles to JavaScript. So this is my class, which is pretty much what I wrote right here, and this is how it compiled. It's different than what I wrote, but it's actually pretty readable. This is the library code, which it's not horrible to read. So I think it's not too bad for a language that compiles to another language. So some of the language features, and I tried to use different examples, not just like hello world. Some people don't like that. And so I tried something cool. And this week I've been going to the board game bash. It was last weekend. So I have games in my brain. So some of my examples have to do with games. And I like writing tests a lot. So my examples have tests. And so take that GHH. I write tests. And also, somebody put me on a list of game developers on Twitter, so I was like, oh, I'm a game developer, so I talk about games. So some of the data types in Dart are num, which is an abstract type, which is kind of weird. It's like a superclass of integer and double. And so I pretty much I've only ever seen int and double used. I haven't seen anybody use num as a type, but you could. String, of course, and Boolean, so say bool. And there's a list data type. There's actually no arrays like you might expect from, Java has arrays and lists. And so it's not quite like Ruby in that way. And there's math, which is like hashes in Ruby. So Boolean is different than JavaScript because it's a true value, not one, not quote one, or not blank. So it's very specific to be true. Everything else is going to be returned false. So Dart is strongly typed. and optionally type, which sounds like oxymoron. So you can give your variables a type, so it's a string, and it'll check to say, oh, you put a string in there, you put a number in there, your editor will complain about you saying, hey, this is not right. Or when you compile it in developer mode or check mode, it will complain at you. And we'll learn about those two modes later. And var name is you're giving it a dynamic type. So you can change your name to 1 later or a different name back to 1. It won't complain because you use the var, which is the dynamic type. Which is kind of how C does it.
No, I'll touch there. Like that example down there below was actually inferred. So that one's type inference. There's other ones where you can actually just, totally, there's no.
Isn't there a dynamic keyword?
There is, but that's for the parameter list.
Okay.
But this one, yeah, because it's a string, it can, the IDEs can still statically, or that Dart analyzer is really what's doing it, can still infer the type there, so you can get a little bit, you don't have to write the string name stuff, that some people hate.
Can you just do name equals something?
You cannot do that, I don't think. I believe
You have to have a var
in front of it,
or
for the declaration.
type.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. And interpolation. For a long time, I didn't talk physically to people about programming, and I always thought this was pronounced interpolation. And I met some human beings who coded it, and I was like, oh, that's how you say it. So yeah, so this is how you put strings, variables inside a string. If you know from JavaScript, you got to do string plus variable plus string, which is kind of it's long and really messy and it drives me nuts. A long string. So in Dart, you put a $sign in front of the variable name in your string, and it'll put that variable in that place. If you want to do an expression, you have a short expression. You want to call a method, then you can put that in braces after the $sign. So it was really nice, and one of the things that pisses me off about JavaScript. Dart has classes. So this is an example of frame class. There's nothing in it. It's completely empty. So here's my first unit test. So here's the package for unit testing. And so class is empty. So methods for testing in Dart are test, the name of your test, and a comma, and then a parentheses. I think is an anonymous function, right, Jesse?
Which one? Yeah.
Yeah. The with your parentheses and the braces is a function with no name. So I create an instance of Meeple, which is sort of an M, and then I expect M, and use the word is and the type to check the type of M, and you can do is true. It has to be exactly true for it to be true. So there's a helper there to say is true for the test. And Meeple, if you didn't know, is a little guy using some games, and I don't know how they came up with the name Meeple, but it's like people, but not. Dart also has private and getters and setters. So I stole this code from Jesse's code. He's a contact, and the first name, last name, they have the default getters and setters, which is like you would expect from Ruby with the add or accessible. And then Twitter has the default, but then I override it and give it at the bottom a different setter. So I want to make sure I add the at in front of it. And then the string underscore ID is a private variable. It uses that as a convention, and also it'll make that private. Then Jesse has a getter for ID, returns a value of what the private variable is. And he has a getter that builds a string of first name and last name. And that equal sign bracket, I call it fat arrow, people call it hash bracket. That makes a special syntax for making a function, and I'll show that in a few slides. Any questions on that?
I'm going to talk about libraries.
No.
So I'll just kind of touch and say, like, so Dart has private, but it's actually, if you're familiar with Java, it would be package private in a sense. So you have these things called libraries that you can define that have, a certain, you can have a collection of files in there, right, that are, I guess you could call it lexically scope. And within there, you can still access those underscore values, but anything outside of your library, you can't. So again, it's similar to package private in the Java world.
Cool. And for constructors, this is really, really cool because it cleans up a lot of the repetition. I probably should have made an example of it showing your normal way. So there's a class Meeple that has two properties, color and location. And the constructor, you put the name of the class as it says you would do in Java. And then you do this.color and this.location, which sets the variables of color and location to the private, to the local, to the properties of the class. So that's pretty cool. You don't have to do incoming variable, like you say a string color, and then inside you do this.color equals color, which is kind of like repetitive and like that. It's messy. And then so here's a test. Those two properties, color and location, are available with the dot operator to get the color and location of where your Meeple is. So the this.color, this allocation are syntactic sugar. I think when it writes it into JavaScript, it probably spells everything out the long way. You think?
Yes.
Yeah, probably.
Well, the long way, but then it's minified and all that kind of stuff. Yeah.
Okay. And more with constructors or properties and methods in general is you can do it in two ways. You can pass in variables through the position and through name placement. This one is the positional. So the position of the first variable is going to be at the first one, and there's only one in this class. And the default is set with an equal. So the default value is 1. So that one, here's my word of warcraft character, Kadar. She's a hunter, and so she's a level 1. And I call level up, and it becomes 2 because it takes the default, which is 1, levels up by 1, and increases this value here by 1, and that's 2. In this test, Kadar is a hunter level 1. Let me raise her up 2 levels. So we overwrite the default, which is 1, with 2, making it increase it up to 3. So you don't have to have a default, but if you do, then you use an equal sign. However, if you want to do the name parameters, and it's kind of weird that it's different. Instead of a bracket, it uses the curly brace. Instead of an equal sign, it has a colon for the default. So pretty much the same thing. The difference is here is you can specify by and a value instead of just passing in the value. So if you have a long list of parameters, that's a lot easier to type than remembering which order things go in. Here is a shorthand function that was in Jesse's code when I set the name of the value of the Twitter attribute. So the shorthand is name, parentheses, and bad arrow and expression. I think that you don't have to have the parentheses if you don't have a parameter. Just use the bad arrow. So here's a anonymous function, level up, bad arrow, this dot level So it would increase the level, by 1. So it's pretty straightforward, but that's how you see that arrow is probably a given on this function. And so here's another example that has more parameters. So I have a list of strings, 1, 2, and 3. I split it into an array. So then I have an array of string numbers. And I use for. This kind of like inject and reduce in Ruby. So you have a starting value, and you do something, and you add on to it. So this one takes 2 parameters, P and C, and I take P, and I parse out C, which takes the string to a number and then add it up. So basically just adding up the numbers. But here where you would see is an this function, which is pretty handy. It's kind of short and concise, and it's used in JavaScript a lot. We don't have to have extra syntax of function and parentheses, brackets everywhere like we do with JavaScript. Here's the generics I mentioned. So, has anybody used generics in the languages before? You don't have that in Ruby. Java's got it in C#, C++.
There's standard template library. Yeah. That's kind of like the grandfather rule, maybe. I don't know. I'm sure there's something else, but yeah.
I learned about that my last year of college, and I learned Java, and I was like, what is this? And now that I've been programming a long time, I realize how valuable it is to have your list be of a certain type, and you put integer in there, it's going to have an error or a string, and it just seems to me really neat and it's nifty. When I was reading C#, I was like, this is so awesome. It's just so object-oriented, and so everything is labeled. So to make the initialize the list, you need to pass it the name of your generic class, meeple, in there, and then equals new list meeple. And you can do add on to a list in 2 ways, either calling add and passing in the value, or in the second example, you can add them with the bracket operator. Is in other ways, Jesse?
Where's that?
The bracket operator on line 14.
Oh, wow.
Or 12.
I've never seen that myself.
Yeah, so you can create a list like that.
Oh, when you said add them, I was thinking, okay, yeah.
I mean, you can,
Yes, that's the static way.
yeah, the second way is like kind of how you probably do it, most often in Ruby, since there's no list in Ruby, you have a special class. So that's pretty cool. And next is mixins, which we have mixins in Ruby, but I think this is pretty much the same. Would you say, Jesse?
Yeah, similar. I haven't really done much with either one of them in Ruby or Dart yet.
So for this example, there's class of a character, which is empty. There's nothing in it. And then I have a class called ranged, which just has one method that returns true for a ranged attack. And what you use it is you do class hunter extends character with range. So you take the empty character class, which you probably would have stuff in there, and add the ranged attack. So hunters will be ranged, mages will be ranged, and warlocks will be ranged. So you can put that common functionality into the range class and share it amongst 3 classes. And in the test, you can see that I create a new hunter named Kadar, and then I call ranged attack on it, and it should be true. That's basically how you would have a kind of functionality in Ruby, but then it makes sense include that in multiple classes. And Dart is also functional. The second is Dart, and it's taking a query of a button, which is probably going to be an array, and it's going to map on it and pull out all the text of the buttons, and then find where all the text is not null, and then join it with the comma. So we do that, you know, in Ruby a lot. And it's similar to the functional example of closure. So I stole these slides from, that was the one you showed me, the talk. Bob.
Oh,
Bob.
Nystrom.
Yeah, Bob Nystrom. So he talked about that. It was near the end, I think. But that's pretty cool. And so I've been learning Clojure a little bit, and I was like, oh, I can do functional programming in Dart. And so that's super cool. Then there's interfaces, which I don't know, maybe you guys can explain more, but it doesn't have the interface keyword. It uses the abstract. And so I just made up something really contrived. So say that you had a hunter who was a ranged class, and say they put all the hunters on a certain server, so they have to log in to a certain server and log out of a certain server, so you can put those login specifics in a hunter class, implementing the abstract class login and log out of class MMO, and I just put print for something to put there, but that could be one way you could share the format of something with multiple classes, making the implementation specific for each class inside of the class. Is that right?
Yeah.
Okay.
And you can also, an abstract class, unlike an abstract class, unlike an interface, you can actually have implementation too in some of the methods. So you could have, if you have a hierarchy, you can have some things that have a default implementation and then, specialize in the children.
I also read that every class is also an implicit interface. Did you hear that too? So in class we have
that's true. Yeah. Everything you implement something else.
Yeah. It's kind of a mind-boggling thing about it. But since the underlying language JavaScript is not strongly typed early, so that's how it works underneath.
Kind of gives you multiple inheritance, but you only have one extends, and then you can implement multiple other classes. So
one extends and like multiple mixins.
Yeah. Implements too.
And so here's the Dart VM has two modes: check, and this is when int string for exceptions if it's invalid, and then you have production mode where it actually ignores the types, but it's really fast. So you develop and test your application in check mode so that everything works, and then you deploy it, and it's super fast. And Jesse's he likes to measure the speed of things, so he'll
Speed of light.
he's going to show them some stats on that. So you can also use Dart for like console apps, and so I made a little game watching a show called Halt and Catch Fire. You can watch it. They were playing a mud in there, and I was like, oh, I can make one of those. So like one of the guys made mud for the girl, and I'm like, oh, that's sweet. I can make a mud for my husband to play. You want to play it? Okay. So I was like, how do you do that? And I was this is my first Dart project, because I was just playing with it, and it was super fun. So there's a library, Dart.io. You can't use that if you're doing this. You can't use that library in a web app. It wasn't built. It would say you can't use that in here. So that's pretty cool. I can show it, but basically that's all it does. It does give you a list of locations to go to, but that's as far as I got. So now I'm going to show web applications. This is I followed a tutorial from Pluralsight, and it was old. It uses a web UI library, but now you don't use it anymore. There's a thing called Polymer, which is brand new and it's really cool. So I'm going to show. I'll show some of that. The editor here is Dart has their own editor as a debugger, and down here is like the little console and statuses. I should figure out how to make these bigger.
Font, pound, comma. I'm sorry, pound.
I got it.
Command, yeah.
I wish I did make it bigger.
That dialog's a little on your other screen.
So here's the basic page. This little app just tracks your protein for the day. I don't know, this guy, John Simez, everything he writes is the same app. I've done some C# tutorials and it's all the same protein tracker. But it's pretty straightforward. So this is the index file, and in Polymer, you're actually like inventing your own HTML tags. And so this is called protein tracker, and you include the Dart HTML, which this here is our web component, which is something new. Has anybody seen it before? Web components. It was announced at Google I/O this year, and I think last year a little bit. But it's like it's the new thing, and it's not specific to Dart at all. You can do it in JavaScript, but it's going to be the next wave of components, and it's really cool. And so this is just the home page, and then here is the code for the component. So there is this includes the Polymer, and we define the element by Polymer element. And so here's where we got the protein tracker HTML tag. So this is defined here. This is how the template is. So there's a text button, total, and here are these curlies. This is the data binding, and it's really cool because it makes the code you just use total, and you have a total. You have define a function called add amount, and it just calls it, and it's super cool. Here is the Dart code. We define this line of code as being the custom tag protein tracker, and we have total and the amount, which is a string. And here's the function add amount that gets bound to the button. Here's the function for the reset button, and that's it. And let me run it.
While you're running, I'll touch on those at symbols. I don't claim to know a whole bunch about them, but they're called metadata in Dart. And give you a little bit of reflective programming ability. Dart has something called mirrors, which is the reflection API. Of course, reflection in general also leads to performance issues potentially. So you also have some ability to localize what gets reflected upon and what doesn't. But those symbols help kind of compartmentalize where you're reflecting on your code.
So this is Chromium, just a special Chrome browser. It doesn't scale, I guess. But the app, you add a number, hit the button, increases the total, and increases the amount. So, at first, the old, before I added, I converted it to a polymer element. It looked like jQuery. You got the value of the thing, you changed it, put it back in. It's just like, oh, use this query selector, not $sign. Basically, it looks like that. But with the web component, it's very contained into a little bit that you can include in different things and package it up. And it's super cool. So to make those curly total and amount strings visible in your class, you need to put an observable annotation. Is that what you called it?
Or yeah, annotation or metadata. They call it, yeah.
If you don't have observable, it ain't gonna data bind it, but that's super cool. A list, you just can't put observable on it. I tried that at first, and I'm like, oh, it doesn't work. But for a list, you need to convert to an observable with this method and pass in your string, and then it'll work. And so the list grows by adding it down here, and then it just shows up on your screen just like magic. So cool. Someone mentioned, I think it's Austin.RB or Austin on Rails. People were like, hey, web components, it's so cool. And I'm like, yeah, I didn't know it's cool. It is super cool. It just makes a really neat little package. You don't have all these bunch of like boilerplate code to set everything up. And then the reset function just sets it to 0 and adds a history item. And any questions? Okay, I think I'm going to pass it over to Justin.
All right.
So let me just
So, has anybody here done any Dart or anything like that? Anybody, people familiar with like web development stuff, like front-end web development? And like Nola was mentioning, Dart has this split personality kind of thing. Maybe kind of close to like what JavaScript and Node have. But it's a little bit different in that Dart has an actual virtual machine and on the back-end side. And I guess first of all, good. Okay, so my name is Jesse. I work at a company called SonarDesign. We produce a product called Lumo, which is one iteration of our overall long-term goal. And the long-term goal is to create, to kind of be this nice alternative to people that want to create apps that kind of can run effectively on desktop and mobile apps and the various flavors of iOS and Android and all that kind of good stuff, right? You think PhoneGap, but one of the differences we have is that unlike PhoneGap, which is basically the browser wrapped into a native shell that still uses DOM API and things like that, which in my personal experience trying to develop some mobile apps, I haven't, at least my personal belief is that the DOM still isn't quite there for the overall full experience. And that's kind of the Sonar philosophy too. So our tool is all written in Dart. There's an editor that you can use it's basically kind of like, Flash meets, I don't have that up, but I do have some I have some demos of the actual tool, but I mean of the creative stuff. I should have pulled that up, but I have to close right now. I have to actually pull some code. But yeah, it's kind of like Flash meets Inkscape or Illustrator or something. You can draw shapes on it and then build certain types of interactions and things like that. But one of the things we're trying to do with Lumo is target that online presentation space, like the keynote Nola was using, and Emaze and Prezi and things like that. And so here's some examples of that. Here is kind of our intro to what you can do with this Lumo tool. So there's a little, you can see that it's kind of running online, or kind of running under a player, and you can kind of choose between the slides to kind of push it along. So yeah, I mean, idea is to kind of lower the barrier to entry to people that want to put things out there online. This one's actually a video here, but actually, when I tried that, it did surface a bug for us there. One of the things you can do with all your shapes is you have actions, so you can actually, effectively create buttons, and they can respond, and you can, kind of drag and drop your way into that kind of stuff. We're going to add more to that event model, of course. We're pretty early stage. And the idea, again, is to be kind of multi-platform. This is kind of where I fit into the company. Most of our group is kind of assembled of former game developers, and they've got that mindset, and they know how to do the 2D and 3D math-based development that it takes to develop, totally in Canvas, no DOM, none of that. It's all drawing shapes, but we, of course, expose that tool for other people to use. But on the other side of the fence, we want to be able to allow our users to also analyze their presentations. Like I said, our long-term goals are more like an app-based thing. So we want to allow them to analyze what type of performance metrics they want to capture. So one of my challenges is to, you can build analytical systems fairly, I don't want to say easily, but somewhat easily when you know the metrics you're trying to capture ahead of time. But when you don't know what your users are going to use, then it's a little bit harder. But anyway, this is an example of Dart in action. One of the reasons we're using Dart is, unlike JavaScript, because we know these are large apps we're building. All the type inference and the static typing, at least optional static typing, all that kind of stuff. One of the things that helps you, especially when you're working within an IDE, it helps you capture a lot of bugs that you might not otherwise capture without full test suites, which are, you can argue that that's definitely needed. But there are a lot of things I find when I'm just developing within Dart that I wouldn't have found unless I ran the code. So I'll actually show a little bit of that. So that's one example of what we do. Here's another one. Kind of want to show we're trying to shoot for certain parity. And so if I hold that up and I run this guy at the same time, I should, it's the same. Basically, I'm not running the same exact. Basically, I'm running the same URL in the browser, and they're not synced or anything. But the performance is fairly good even on the mobile device. And again, it's kind of to show we think that Dart helps this experience for us from a development standpoint. Tool. Oh yeah. Our graphic designer helped me out and gave me a cool little tool because I wanted to see. We have a path drawing tool. Basically, she put together another presentation that kind of shows how you can build a Ruby.
Made it just for us?
Yep. And that's like for a finished product with gradients and stuff like that. But yeah, the presentation actually shows how you can use our pathing tool to draw yourself a Ruby. Something Nola brought up that I don't know if I'm going to be successful with being able to show you. But Dart, the idea here is these are performance benchmarks coming from Google. I think these are coming from Google. It's a similar chart that I've seen from Google, but this is like an updated one. But what it's supposed to show is relative performance between, I believe the one on the top is the Dart VM running, itself. The middle one of them should be V8, and I think that's the one on the bottom.
The yellow said it was idiomatic JavaScript.
Yeah, one is hand drawn down.
Yeah.
This chart is a little bit different than the one I've seen, so not that performance jump at the end threw me off there. But the point I'm trying to make is the VM was created by people that have worked on, developed V8, and before that, the Java Hotspot VM. So they're pretty confident they can continue to increase the performance of the Dart VM too, and they're bringing along all this knowledge they had beforehand. It's definitely nowhere near as fast as a long-running Java process, but one thing on the flip side that it has that Java doesn't, for me at least, is a fast-running startup time, right? Where a lot of times you have to wait for the VM to kind of warm up. I thought I had one more, just kind of like what we can do with our tool. That same lady that did the Ruby for me, this is like kind of like what you can really, if you know what you're doing, what you can do with our tools. So, so the VM, like Nola mentioned, you get most of what you can with the front-end version of Dart that gets transpiled over to JavaScript. But with the VM, you get access to things like the I/O package, which gives you access to file I/O and socket I/O, and you can set up, and within that same I/O package, you can set up a web server, basically using, kind of batteries included, out of the box stuff. What I put together as a sample, can you guess? Oh, and also, one of the things I'm doing is actually I'm using the Eclipse IDE instead of Dart Editor, because the Dart Editor is basically an Eclipse-based application, but you don't get some of the things like extra plugins that you get with Eclipse. And so they also have this as a plugin, the Dart Editor. And with that, you get the full power of Eclipse, which includes plugins like I use a Vim plugin and things like that. So because normally I would like to just work with the Vim editor, but because of the tooling and everything, you actually get the best of both worlds, and get some fairly fast editing in Vim.
Plus, he used to be Java developer, so.
I didn't do Vim, on the Eclipse side, but it's been it's kind of coming back to this. It's been pretty interesting. It's been a while. When I was doing some of the Ruby stuff I was doing, okay, so the idea, this is just basically supposed to be a contact manager app. So you have, it's an app that is a RESTful server that basically lets you create, do CRUD operations on a contact. And a contact is, I think Nola had some of the slides. So contact is just like first name and last name, all I have in mind. She added the Twitter stuff. And then I don't know if we talked about this.
No.
But that's, with Dart, you get extra, you can define additional constructors. So what I have is basically two constructors. The default constructor takes first name and last name, and then one with all fields allows you to specify an ID. And the way I make use of that is my database code will basically take whatever contact was asked to be created and then add an ID to it. So, but all the rest of the code, if it needs to create a contact, it will use the top one. Let me go back, and all Dart projects, regardless of whether or not they're made for the web or not, start with a main, and that's how you kind of know where to start. There's no, jQuery, body, onload, or all that kind of stuff. You always know there's the same type of start point, regardless. Kind of like, what is it? option parser, I think, in Ruby. There's a package that lets you, from the command line, specify arguments. And it looks, I think it looks, it's been a while since I looked at the Ruby stuff, but it looks a lot like the option parser. Let me see, can you guys see this? I'm more familiar with the color scheme.
You do the same thing in Ruby? Wait,
Yeah, can you guys see that all right? Or would you prefer the white background instead?
I can see that.
Okay, cool. What was
you're talking about the option.
Yeah. So if I come over here and stop this server, here, stop this server. So I'm in the command line, basically in the shell, and here in the bottom is my Dart program. And when I do help, just like a normal command line program should, it gives you the help text. What I have in mind is I have the ability to specify port. If you want to like pre-build the number of a pre-built set of contacts, you can do that. Then I have something called a DB strategy. The DB strategy for me is it's kind of using the strategy pattern. If you're familiar with any of that, basically I have this repository class that will take, in this case, either a memory or a Postgres DB strategy. And the rest of the code is none the wiser, but I'm able to insert, get the behavior I want with that strategy. And of course, if you do have Postgres, then you need a URI to get to it, and it has sensible defaults. So if I run this thing, right, with using some of the, so I just said, hey, build 10 contacts for me. And then when I want to go request that data, I get 10 contacts back because it built it for me. And it's pretty fast, I thought. But it's all using memory, right? It's just basically, let's see. Oops. So here's the repository class, which, let me step back. Yeah, repository class takes in its constructor a DB strategy, right? So this class has some implementation, but it's basically a delegator. It just takes it's the interface that the rest of the code uses, and then it stashes away the DB strategy in a private, and the rest of the API basically is just delegating around to the strategy, right? That's the thing that subs in for the actual behavior. And this is kind of a touch on what Nola was talking about with abstract classes. So at the very top, I have a pure abstract class that just implements a bunch of, or declares a number of functions. Then you get into the meat of the actual strategies and what they do. And of course, they implement that. And one of the cool things about this is I'm trying to show the tooling. If I were to go in here and took this out, right? Take that out. If you can see it, underneath that Postgres strategy, it just turned yellow, right? And the problem is, let me highlight over here. You probably can't see that, but basically what it's saying is that it's missing a concrete implementation. I haven't implemented all the methods as I declared that I'm going to implement DB strategy, but I didn't because I didn't declare all the methods. I get that static analysis right in my IDE right away. That's, to my knowledge, that's something you don't really get with Ruby because of all the, it's hard, it's almost impossible to do that, right? There is no static analysis you can really do. There's a certain level that IDEs can do, but it's not quite the same. So that helps me a ton. Another thing that IDE will also get you is if for some reason I was going to implement another. Right. So the IDE is also able to tell me, okay, yeah, you didn't implement them, but it also can give me some help. And that one that's highlighted says create 5 missing overrides. So as soon as I do that, I get all my, at least I get, the IDE is able to help me, along the way as I start to implement these, this behavior.
You don't get that with the Dart editor?
I don't know,
The
you might.
The auto.
You might. I stopped using it. So I went from Dart editor, got fed up with that, to Vim, and because Dart didn't at the time have CTAG support, I wasn't able to use some of the tools I like to use in Vim. So I went back to the Dart editor just recently. I'm sorry, I decided to try Eclipse with Vim, and that was kind of my sweet spot. I've even tried WebStorm, and that's pretty cool too. If you're familiar with Java, WebStorm is written in Swing versus the SWT stuff that Eclipse is, and sometimes it's a little bit more heavyweight sometimes, so you get a little bit more spin up of the fan with WebStorm. So I'm kind of happy with Eclipse. The Dart editor,
It does warn you if you didn't implement those things.
it does in the data, yeah. So that it should, because that should be implemented at the Dart editor level, the plugin level. But I wasn't 100% sure.
But I don't think it gives you the fill-in starter stuff.
Yeah, it's a weird combination. I didn't realize for a while that the plugin was available for Eclipse this way, and I was complaining for a while, at work. Why would they get rid of all that power you have in Eclipse and try to do their own thing? I think it was trying to lower the barrier to entry, because what really Google's trying to target, they are trying to target Java developers actually that would do something like use GWT versus actually just writing JavaScript, because they wanted some type of familiar interface. So that's why Dart as a language doesn't, and they'll tell you this, they don't try to be the next Ruby, but they try to be somewhere, along the path so that you can get, some dynamic behavior, all the functional style programming, stuff like that, but still kind of be recognizable to a Java developer or C# developer that wants to make that jump. So yeah, speaking of, so one of the things, I can't remember, Noah, if you talked about futures.
No, I say that for you. That's hard.
Oh my goodness. So yeah, let's look at the interface real quick. So with this interface, my interface is returning things, is either returning a future or a string. And the reason is that, one of the reasons is, well, if I had just had developed just the in-memory strategy, I wouldn't have needed this. But Dart, like Node and V8 and all that, is asynchronous by nature. It's single-threaded, and in order to avoid pegging the CPU or pegging your single-threaded process by doing some long-running operation, everything's very non-blocking. You've got these callbacks that you would in something like Node, but then Dart basically exposes these things called futures. If you're familiar with JavaScript promises, it's a similar idea. Basically, I can immediately almost return a future object, and at some later date, you can have your callbacks called through that interface. I'll show that. Streams are kind of the opposite. So with a future, you're kind of, it's almost like a pull mechanism. I declare this future, and at the client level, I expect my code to be called later, one time. It's kind of a one-time shot. And with a stream, it's more like a pipeline of data. And every time I get a new event that comes through that stream, my callback code gets called. So that one's really good when you have like a list of data that you want to return back as fast as you can, and not necessarily like maybe I had in my repository thing here, maybe I was returning 1 million rows back. Well, I wouldn't want to buffer all that in memory and then return it back. It'd be more efficient if I could stream it out. And I think Node has a similar stream concept. And the idea is that hopefully your memory profile is really steady as all this data is just flowing through your system. You can process, you can do folds and all the other functional programming stuff that Noah was showing, just in the concept of a stream. So it's asynchronous, and that's the real benefit. So when you're kind of developing, when you're on the back end, especially, like my front end, my platform guys, they don't really have to worry about futures and streams all that much. But on the back end, you have to kind of think, oh yeah, well, am I going to make some kind of potential blocking call or asynchronous call that I want to wrap up, right? And in my case, I'm using a Postgres driver that connects to a database, returns a future, runs a query, returns a stream. Those kind of things I need to expose. If I want some other kind of generic behavior, then I need to think, okay, my contract here needs to have all that kind of stuff. I don't know if you really want to look at the gory details of implementing futures and strings. It could be nicer if you're familiar with C#. There's something called an async and await, and it basically gives you the ability to take these futures and instead of having to do the, let me show you at least the then. So back in the contact manager, which is the main thing that kicks off the system. I apologize for jumping all over the place. I didn't really come in with a script. One of the things I'm doing is I'm using a package called start, which is very Sinatra-like. So with start, I'm able to kind of declare my routes that I want, and then so with my routes, you know, if I have a GET request at this path, then that's going to call this handler here. In here is an example of being a client to the stream. Excuse me. So I call my find context method. It immediately basically returns me a string, and then I can, if I want to, chain right off of that, call the listen method on there, and then, you know, effectively what's going on at runtime is that listen method gets called repeatedly every time a new, and the way I've implemented it, every time a new contact has been added, and then my callback does basically maps that data over into JSON and then streams it out as well. And that's basically what we saw here when I basically, you know, when I called up. That was the code we just exercised. But for saving a contact, I believe we can turn a future. So here is an example of future. So the method ahead and at front basically returns a future, and I'm using chaining again. And then in this case, you get a then method. And unlike the string where you kind of constantly get pumped, your callback gets called over and over again. Your then method gets called basically once. And you can do another, you know, if you wanted to, of course, you could have function calls in here to kind of clean up some of this code. Another thing you do is have error handlers that you can hang off of that then or that future as well. So it's kind of a try catch. There's also something called when complete, which is like your try catch finally. I don't know. Anybody have questions about the code itself? I know I'm kind of jumping around. Nothing. One of the things I was going to kind of show is first. All the contacts, 10 of them in there. I was just calling the delete method. One of my routes has a delete HTTP method defined, and it will delete all the contacts out.
Is that using a database?
It's using my in-memory database. But I basically switch it over. If I did, yeah. I kind of spent maybe about, this was fast. I didn't get to spend as much time as I'd like to have. So if I say DB strategy is now Postgres, so instead of 0 contacts, I'm just using the Postgres database. So if I send, basically this is a curl request to send a chunk of pre-made JSON in, so it's doing a post request. And so now I sent that data in. Request, oh, I'm sorry, my database already had data in it. And because every time I stop the in-memory one, of course, the memory, that database goes away. But the real Postgres database, which is running in a Docker container, it, of course, stuck around. So when I deleted, I had 600 and some odd, or 6,000 and some odd entries in there the first time. So I have 0 in there now, and we ran it again, just chunk in 1. Oops. That shouldn't have done that. Okay, well, there's a bug. what I was going to show instead was kind of a I hate to use the word benchmark, but but I'm going to run like a HTTP benchmarking tool against this system. And what it is has anybody ever used a tool called, I guess, Work, W-R-K? It's an HTTP benchmarking tool, and it's kind of like Apache Bench, if you ever used that. I've tried to use Apache Bench on my OS 10 box here, and I've run into problems where it'll run out of file handles before I kind of hit what I'm looking for. So I found Work, which is neat, and it actually I'm able to specify things like a Lua script to. In my case, what I'm trying to basically do is pump in as many contacts as I can in a certain amount of time. And 30 seconds here, but we'll change that to 10. And I want to do it with 8 threads, each of the threads having basically divided by, so each thread has one connection. So multi-threaded, and each has one connection, one persistent connection. The Lua script, Lua script looks like this. It's basically just creating a really simple JSON document, but it's sticking a counter in there, and then it's firing that post request off to the same URL I've been playing around with. It'd be interesting to see. Well, I'm using the in-memory one. I'm pretty sure that works. But anyway, so we'll run that. I think I need to save that again. I want to run it for 30 seconds. So it's going to run. And while it's running, I'm going to switch over. I really quickly, it's been a while since I've done Ruby, put together a Sinatra app. And instead of all that kind of class infrastructure I had in place, I was just trying to simulate the 2 operations I'm doing on that other side. I basically want to save a contact and then get it back, right? And I kind of want to run the same benchmark test against it that I am, on the Dart side. So our Dart one ran at about 4,700 requests per second, and in 10 seconds time. So I want to kind of do the same thing on the Ruby side. Now, bear with me. I'm sure I'm doing something wrong here, right? I mean, it's not the same, right? But I'm going to attempt. I'm running that one in Unicorn. I actually saw some performance gains when I did that versus the WebRick. Yeah. So basically, I have the same. Wait, I'm going to change that one too, so it's not. Get some relative, because what I'd like to see is if anybody wanted to, I don't know if we have time for, I don't know if we're going to do a coded kata, but if somebody that knows Event Machine or something like that could do something. So on the Dart side, we had 4,700 requests per second, and on the Ruby side, we had about 993 requests per second. And so it's kind of our throughput there. And that's the show, kind of like the big thing for going for Dart, right, is non-blocking, even though it's single threaded as well. So you got the asynchronous I/O going on, and it's in a VM, and I believe their garbage collector, like Java, is like a generational garbage collector, which I believe Ruby 2.1, which I'm running, I think that's the new thing for Ruby 2.1, if I'm not mistaken, which is nice and it's good. But so VM has at least the VM creators for Dart are kind of top of their game, and hopefully Dart's performance will get better. But
So just what's the Dart performance? That's the Ruby.
this is the Ruby one, and then the Dart one's 4700. And I think, I didn't have enough time, but I think that discrepancy would be larger if I was using my Postgres example, because then you're getting into I/O, and then it's again the non-blocking I/O versus blocking I/O. And I have a feeling there will be a bigger difference there. So the paradigm doesn't change in Dart, but it is different, right, with all the futures and the strings, and it's a little strange. Dart also has something called isolates. And the reason why I wasn't done with what or as polished as I wanted to be with this is that I tried to do an isolate example too. And isolate basically gives you an abstraction. If you're familiar with something called the actor model, Celluloid uses this for Ruby. And it's kind of like this. It gives you concurrency and potentially multiple threads, maybe multiple processes. It doesn't matter to you, but it's shared nothing style architecture, right? No, with multi-threaded programming and even sometimes multi-process, you have to worry about mutable state and whether or not your variables are being modified by some other thread when you don't expect them to. The actor model kind of compartmentalizes all that stuff. Gives you concurrency, but you basically are passing messages between the actors. Scala has it, and Erlang is the granddaddy of the actor model. Well, Dart has a version of it too. However, if you look at the mailing lists, it's not fully baked, and they want to do more to it, but really Dart's focus is more on the front end than it is on the back end. And I'm actually, this contact manager thing has been a little bit of something I wanted to do for a while, and this thing, the comparison between something like Ruby and Dart, and probably Scala, and maybe even Go, because Node as well, actually, yeah, definitely, but I doubt I would do that one. What I was gonna say is, because I'm looking for languages I want to use to implement the back end. For company reasons, right, because the rest of the company is a Dart shop, I'd like to use Dart, but if we get successful, we have a lot of, the analytics flow that's coming through, I need to have an option of concurrency. Non-blocking I know is great, but I need to be able to span that out across the multiple cores. I need to be able to use it. So this is actually, and I know there's a few options even with Dart, like you can have even a machine and you have just multi-process development that helps. But so yeah, actually this is kind of me. Doing this helped me start that little process of I want to also do a Scala one. The Scala and Dart kind of look alike in some ways, but Scala's like type safety on steroids. But anyway, that's about all I had. Blew through that code a little bit. Got some questions about it. I want to look at things. Let me know.
When they were building the platform, they just knew from the get-go that they weren't doing on Dart, or they.
Yeah, that's actually a point I wanted to make too. Is their background, my founder's background, were Flex, ActionScript and Flex, and our platform looks a lot like that. So Dart, in some ways, looks a lot like ActionScript, and then we basically underneath the covers are generating XML documents that represent the presentations that I showed, and then we have like data binding going on underneath the covers. It looks a lot like Flex if you're familiar with it. So basically, XML that is consumed by some language that then you can think of jQuery and all that the same way. Like we then operate on that XML and we have a player that will basically render all that stuff. But yeah, because of his background, he wasn't the JavaScript or CTO. He was coming from that background, and before that, C and C++, and wasn't familiar with JavaScript. But as a game developer, they're always, like even more so than I am, always worried about performance. And he knew after reading some of the things about Dart, and if nothing else, just to compile the point that the compiled or transpiled Dart to JS is usually, more often than not, especially for a really large application, a lot faster than hand rolled. You can run all the variable hoisting and just the weird call stack traces and stuff that Dart hand roll Dart if you do it wrong. Hand roll JavaScript. You can kind of incur. So they knew from the get-go, and they paid the price for a while too, because Dart just recently, I guess, well, since November went 1.0, and which meant all before then APIs changed literally overnight, and there were times where it's just like the JSON API totally changed. We pulled down a new version of the code, and all our code breaks because things like that. So now after 1.0, it's been a lot more stable. They're at 1.5.3, I think is their latest stable release, and things have been a lot better. The only thing that's really out, and they chunked it out actually, was the isolate stuff that I care about more so. Isolates on the web, on the front end, actually are effectively web workers, if you're familiar with those. And the idea behind web workers is, if you're operating on the DOM, you're only on that same single threaded, basically event loop. It's like if you've done any Swing program or UI programming, you only have this one UI thread, and traditionally you don't want to do too much on the UI thread, or you'll get frozen. Your UI will freeze. So web workers actually give you the ability to do operations in separate browser threads, and then communicate back to the main thread and have things happen. So Dart isolates compile to web workers on the Dart to JS side, and they're effectively real threads on the VM side. It's just that they took out, when they went 1.0, they changed the API and then took out all the documentation for it, so it's hard to really figure out how to do it. So I may be doing something different there, like 0Q or something like that. Oh, that's another thing. The Dart VM, I don't have that now. Dart VM is all written in C++, and you can actually, if you want to, kind of like FFI and whatnot for Ruby, you can write native code and basically communicate with the Dart VM, your Dart code and native code. So effectively, like the 0Q, like it's kind of a low-level socket library. There's no wrapper for it now, but there's nothing that says I can't write a wrapper for 0Q and have my Dart code communicate with that, and that could be my isolate. And then on the other side too, you can write C++ and embed Dart, because one of the things Dart does not have, and the creators maintain they'll never have it, there's no eval. So you can't just take Dart's code and ship it somewhere and eval it. But
for security reasons?
Yeah, for security and for performance reasons. They just don't want to support that. But for me, so the reason why that only affects me and my company is that potentially down the road, we might want to have I want to say Hadoop, but some type of MapReduce architecture, right? Like I have all these events that are coming into this database, and eventually that database is going to get too full. So I really want to spin that out to something like S3, right? Multiple files somewhere. And then I want to be able to do, when I'm doing big analytical queries, rather than going and buying Vertica, which we don't have the money for, I'd like to be able to do some kind of MapReduce over all this data, do batch jobs and do processing over all that data. Well, I could do that in Java pretty easily. I can do it in Ruby. I've done it in Ruby with 0Q before. Or I could do it in Dart, but Dart doesn't allow me to ship code like that. But if I had that embeddable Dart, like the reverse side, where I have some C code taking my script, my arbitrary function, and then processing it on that data that's, it's local to it, I could maybe, that's an option for me. So there's a few options, but it all kind of requires work. I hope that was long-winded. Hopefully answered your question. But
see if you can unsign from the.
You don't need it. The next person can just kick it off. There's no
that's all I had. Oh, and I guess I should mention we are hiring. We're I think our focus is really now on front end folks, like the what I talked about. We're looking for people that have gaming backgrounds or desires or understand 2D vector math kind of stuff, all that fun stuff that made me decide when I took my linear algebra class that I wasn't going to be a game programmer. Well, that's what we're looking for. And then on the flip side, I don't know if any of you guys have a data analytics background, but come to find out, when you want to start approximating large data sets, linear algebra. But so I found my way back into it. But yeah, we're on the front end. We definitely do a lot of that. It's a good company. I really like it. People, where we're going. Yeah.
And on the flip side, I'm looking for a job, or a contract job in Ruby. JavaScript.
Yeah.
Here is the kata that we do, and it says you can do it in 30 minutes. And I've done it before in 30 minutes, most of it. So it's a pretty easy. You're taking the string and converting it into a sum. So this one has steps to work out. And I would say it would be fine if we did mob programming. Instead of one computer, we take turns, 2 people. We could, but since the else that you and me have done dark, we're gonna watch us code, listen to us talk for another half hour.
Right, true.
You can plug in the computer in, or use someone's computer.
Yeah.
Plug.
Actually, need to run, but thanks. Yeah.
Alright, so
Was that?
I'll have it on my iPad so you can see the directions as we go. So I'll get it started here. I need 2 screens. Anyways, if you want to follow along on your computer, if you have it here, it's oshderove.com. It's his first kata. I have up on the GitHub for this group. Some starter test files. Somebody has that here. Austin.RB. We have our test is set up. We can start from here. Go back to the directions. It says you create a calculator with a method and add and string numbers. If it can take 0, 1, or 2 numbers and return your sum. Every string will return 0. So we start with make a class called calc. Maybe add method sum. Every string should be 0. This should be 0. So this is a mini test. Can you guys use mini test?
How many tests? A little bit different than I say. So some of that must equal 0. Didn't catch me. He wants to make this pass. Easy. Go for it, Jesse.
So you can make it just pass simply, just make. Feel like my good configuration.
Oh, there. Yeah. No.
Alright,
Yay.
so yeah, that should be, so Control Z out, run and save. There you go. So yay, so make another test. So what is the instruction say? The next thing to do after you take empty string returns 0, for the number 1 string, it should return the 1 number. The sum of 1 is 1. Put the 1 in quotes. Second one. Second. Yeah, single quotes and then that's a string. Let's make it pass.
Learn not to.
Okay, I'm not using the one. You wanna make it pass? Come on, it's easy.
Brave soul. Just hit I and then you're all, it's normal, yeah.
Rate it and Control Z. You saved it. Save it. Pass.
Boom.
Now you go to the next test.
Nice.
So the next test would be 1, 2.
Killed it.
3. Huh?
Oh, colon, set tab stop. Oh, here, I'm gonna do it.
What if, we can come to my pen.
I didn't do it. Tab stop still.
It's fine. Alright, next test. So 1, 2 is equal 3. This should be 3. 1, 2. You want to make this pass? Now it gets a little bit harder.
I'm assuming, well, what I don't know, I don't remember is, do you need to do 2i on those?
Yeah.
Or something, whatever kind of parsing.
So,
So instead of the shorthand, you can do like a 0 and then do whatever operation you need to.
let's try. Numbers equals parts dot select. Let's try that. So we get a collection of strings of the numbers. Like each of them called 2i on it, put it back into a array called numbers.
So sum
Just in numbers. We probably broke some syntax, but we'll try it.
I think it's still.
Oh, we broke it.
There's no return.
Oh. I don't think it likes my.
Yeah,
my
I guess you'd have to do a full,
That's
do
my,
that.
my shortcut for collect. So if you don't do it that way, you need to put it right, call a line parameter, it's called E. Under you not the first objective. So use a block and a block parameter, each one called 2i on, convert to a number, and like those it back into an array. So let's try that. Alright, so the numbers worked, but 0 did not work. So who wants to make the 0 pass again? Should we, here we go. Yeah, clearly my tabs are not normal.
They're set to 4, which,
I've never used tabs.
really? Cool.
The base bar.
Really?
Cool. Okay. So we got 1, 2, 3. Let's try a longer number, just to make sure that we can, try it out. 3 YY space. Let's try 6, 4, 1, 2, 3. Okay, so, you see, is there any way we refactor these to make them shorter or more efficient or cleaner?
Well, if you wanted to, right, you could do the reduce, but
If you want to reduce it. We could just smash everything on the and make a big long line.
yeah, if you wanted
That's
to,
like-
yeah, but yeah, if you wanted to do that.
That's kind of ugly. So I guess we don't actually need to put sum equals. And that's the last thing in the function, it'll return that value. I like this one zero stop. That's what I usually do. That's something like that. Yeah. Okay, so the next part would be to handle, I know a number of numbers, we handle three numbers, make sure you're good there. And then add the method to new lines between numbers instead of commas. So for your new lines instead of commas, it would just be replacing commas, new lines. And,
Yeah, the actual test code needs to have new lines. That's the key. Yeah.
there you go. I have to change my test.
Let's see your quotes. Test 3.
It's not like, oh, because it's the same quotes here. Because we're literally for actual, literal, this is the same quotes, right?
I think so. I remember in there.
Okay. So, um,
So let's take it. You can be able to use either new lines or commas in the same string.
so step 4 is to be able to put a delimiter at the front of the string, and that can just do out.
What?
Even in 3.1, it says one new line, 2, comma 3.
Oh, yeah.
So either,
Yeah.
either. Let's do that part, and then we'll call it a night. I'll show you the one I did this in Dart, and I'll show you with that. And you can see what it looks like for this problem. So we put in or. So I need to make this into a regular expression now. There's string. Display keys, /n, or and a count. So either of those will split. Maybe test case or it's mixed. So let's put a comma to then a new one. Hey, it works. So let me show you actually what I did in Dart. This was my very first thing in Dart.
Hit Control M. Close. It should. Oops. It's the one. I'm sorry. Hit it. Control M again. Okay, then focus on.
That was me, dude.
Okay. Well, if we focus on that other one. Yeah.
Alright. So I include the test package at the top, and I just put, I made a private, I mean, not private, an attribute called input. Set the constructor to accept that value with the shortcut constructor. I have one method called cal. So here I have input equal empty string, value between 0, and that's what we had. I think you can also do, now I know, you can do empty input dot, the method is empty.
Yeah, there's,
So there's a method to do that, so you don't need to put this, but, so then I, oh, it's not empty. I think it is empty. So I went further in the problem and figured out the delimiter, so that's another function. So just over that in DL, and then I do a row expression on that, and split on that, and I skipped the first 3 of the string, which is the delimiter / whatever. So I skip those and just give the numbers. Or if there's no delimiter on it, I just split on a comma or white space. I did a little bit differently. I did comma or white space instead of comma or new line. I guess this would take you to new lines too. So that would be the same. And then here's the fold. Just kind of like, reduce, adding things together. The int dot parse takes the string, converts to a number, and kind of like how the 2i method really works. And returns the sum. So this is pretty fun problem to do. I did it 1 week. I did it 3 times in a week. I had a timer over 20 minutes. So beginning and press it and then stop. And did it next day. I did the same problem again. I did it a little differently. I did it faster. I got further in the problem. And the third day I was like, I don't want to do those beginning parts again. So I just skipped over it and mocked it out and did the parts and did the delimiter part and just knocked out everything else. And that was really fun. That's when I really got the hang of what what's it called? Programming.
functional.
No, it's a website I made for doing katas, styles, the limit style PhD. That's where you mock out stuff, go play with parts.
Oh, I didn't show that. I didn't show my test at all. I had mocks.
Yeah, so you should tweet out the URL for your thing. So there's different styles that you can do. You kind of did TDD, wrote a task, made a task, and I have indexed katas that I've collected, and the first one where we did the string calculator, and it can be done in different files, so I kind of made notes on that. Anyways, we are out of our 2 hours.